We will cover Chapter 13, Consumer Stakeholders, Information Issues. By virtually all measures, consumer spending has been stable to modestly higher over the past 5 years, and consumers have become more cautious and selective about their spending on the entire gamut, really, of products and services. So how important are consumers as stakeholders? According to management expert Peter Drucker, there is only one valid definition of business purpose, and that is to create a customer. Retaining customers is also very important. In fact, small increases in customer retention rates can lead to dramatic increases in profits. Businesses must create and retain customers if they are to succeed in today's competitive marketplace. So it's not surprising that customer relationship management, or CRM, has become an important mantra of marketing. Customer relationship management is the ability of an organization to effectively identify, acquire, foster, and retain loyal, profitable customers. In practice, a focus on customer satisfaction seems to be more prevalent than a focus on customer engagement. An important book told us satisfied customers tell 3 friends, but angry customers tell 3,000. The basic expectations of the modern consumer movement were found in the Consumer's Magna Carta, or the 4 basic consumer rights that were spelled out by President John F. Kennedy in his special message on protecting the consumer interest. Those rights included the right to safety, the right to be informed, the right to choose, and the right to be heard. The right to safety concerns many products, insecticides, foods, drugs, automobiles, appliances that are dangerous. The right to be informed is marketing and advertising related and refers to the consumer's right to know about a product, its use, and the cautions to be exercised while using it. And this right includes the whole array of marketing, advertising, warranties, labeling, and packaging, which we'll go over later in the chapter. The right to choose, although not a great concern today, refers to the assurance that competition is working effectively and that choices are available. The 4th, the right to be heard, was proposed because of many consumers believe that they cannot effectively communicate to business their desires and especially their grievances. So for decades there have been outcries that businesses failed in these responsibilities to consumers, leaving them feeling often neglected or mistreated. And the roots of consumer activism in the United States date back to about 1906 when Upton Sinclair published the book The Jungle, his famous expose of unsanitary conditions in the meatpacking industry. So a definition of consumerism that captures really the essential nature of consumer movement is consumerism is a social movement seeking to augment the rights and powers of buyers in relation to sellers. And although the modern consumer movement is often said to have begun with the publication of Ralph Nader's criticism of General Motors in his book Unsafe at Any Speed, the emphasis for the movement really was actually a complex combination of circumstances. Ralph Nader's contribution to the birth, growth, and nurturance of the consumer movement can't be overstated. Nader arrived on the scene about 50 years ago, and he's still acknowledged as the father of the consumer movement. Many groups make up the loose confederation known today as the consumer movement. Consumerism involves grassroots organizations, social media activism, the rise of many different nonprofit organizations and websites that increasingly specialize in one aspect of consumer products or services. The consumer movement is driven by consumer problems and consumer complaints. There are many examples of consumer problems with businesses. In Figure 13.2 in your book list several that are here on this PowerPoint as well. The high prices, some examples: the high prices of many products, the poor quality of many products, misleading and deceptive advertising, often on social media. So why have questions been raised about businesses' social and ethical responsibilities in the area of product service information? Most consumers know the answer. Companies understandably want to portray their products in the most flattering light. However, efforts to paint a positive portrait of a product can easily cross the line into misinformation or deception regarding the product's attributes. An example of often really absurd. An example is the ad implores you to switch to Verizon high-speed internet at a super low price that'll never go up. And this ad repeats again, guaranteed to never go up. And then when you read the fine print on the same page, it says rates increase after 2 years. So it's pretty deceptive. What part of never go up do we fail to understand? Ethical issues in advertising arise as companies cross a line in their attempts to inform and persuade, and sometimes entertain consumer stakeholders. So the frequently heard phrase, the seamy side of advertising, alludes to the economic and social costs that derive from advertising abuses, and which you will probably be able to give personal examples yourself. There are 4 general types of advertising abuses in which ethical issues surface, and these include situations in which advertisers are ambiguous, conceal facts, exaggerate, or employ psychological appeals. And these 4 types cover most of the common criticism that is leveled at advertising. Ambiguous advertising: one of the simplest ways that companies deceive is through ambiguous advertising, in which something about the product or service is not made clear because it is stated in a way that may mean several different things. An ad can be made ambiguous in several ways, and one way is to make a statement using what we call or weasel words, which leaves it to the viewer to infer the message. Weasel words are inherently vague, and the company could always claim it was not misleading the consumer. Concealed facts is a type of advertising abuse. It refers to the practice of not telling the whole truth or deliberately not communicating information the consumer ought to have access to in making an informed decision. In a variation of product placement term plot placement, sponsors have paid to make their products integrated into the plot line of a TV show. Exaggerated claims. Companies can also mislead consumers by exaggerating the benefits of their products. There are claims that simply cannot be substantiated by any kind of evidence. A general form of exaggeration is known as puffery. It's a euphemism for hyperbole or exaggeration that usually refers to the use of general superlatives like, is Budweiser really the king of beers? Is Wheaties really the breakfast of champions? Those are just a few examples. In advertising, psychological appeals are those that are designed to persuade on the basis of human emotions and emotional needs rather than reason. And this is perhaps as much reason to be concerned about ethics in this category as any other. And one reason is that products can seldom deliver what the ads promise. And another reason is that the psychological appeals can stir emotions in a way that are manipulative and appears designed to take advantage of consumers' vulnerabilities. The next several slides and several pages of the text, this chapter, are dedicated to specific controversial advertising issues, and I'll just highlight these, and you can read over them more in depth. So we've considered 4 major kinds of deceptive advertising. We talked about ambiguous advertising, concealed facts, exaggerated claims, and psychological appeals. But there are many other variations on these themes, but these are sufficient to make our point. So comparative advertising, one of the earliest forms of advertising that became controversial and threatened to affect advertising adversely, is comparative advertising. And this refers to the practice of directly comparing a firm's product or service with the product or service of a competitor, typically going so far as to name the competitor's brand or their product. Comparative advertising sometimes generates unexpected and undesirable conflicts among companies. The use of sex appeal in U.S. advertising has been an ongoing ethical issue for decades, and it took center stage years ago when several women's groups were offended by a series of television commercials sponsored by a major airline. And today, sexual references and innuendos in advertising have become pretty commonplace, featuring men as well as women, and the issue continues to spark a lot of controversy. A troubling trend in using sex appeal advertising campaign is to target younger and younger girls and boys with the idea that they can be sexy too. Most studies have shown that the use of sex in advertising works, and research has also shown that ads that portray young women as sex objects can have a serious impact on the physical and mental health of girls. Advertising to children, this is a hotly debated critical issue over the past several decades, especially on television, and it's a practice that's sometimes been referred to as kid vid advertising. Children are the consumers of the future, and companies are really eager to get their foot in the door of their spending habits, so merchandisers are trying to instill brand loyalty at a very early age. The Children's Advertising Review Unit of the Council of Better Business Bureaus was established to respond to public concerns. Also, advertising children of food products that contain sweets and unhealthy ingredients has become another burning issue, as the obesity epidemic among children has become widely known and debated. Special interest groups have become criticizing companies for their marketing of these products to children. And the obesity crisis among children in the United States is well established, and researchers believe that TV advertising is a significant contributing factor. Regulatory bodies have been trying for decades to get a greater supervisory authority with respect to children's advertising, and in 1990 the CTA, the Children's Television Act, was passed. This was a grassroots activist group known as the Action for Children's Television. They claim credit for getting the legislation passed, and this act prohibits the airing of commercials about products or characters during a show about those products or characters, and limited the number of commercial minutes in children's shows. Marketing to the poor, a variety of businesses have found that significant profits can be obtained from advertising and marketing to poorer people. The subprime credit industry, for example, businesses provide financing to high-risk borrowers at high interest rate. And while this gives poor people greater access to cars and credit cards, computers, homes, it often ends up with the borrower being buried in a mountain of debt. Advertising alcoholic beverages, the issue of this type of advertising, especially to younger demographic profile, it's also been an issue for a long time. In addition to the concern for the health effects, critics have argued that many alcohol ads link drinking with valued personal attributes such as sociability, elegance, physical attractiveness that might relate to outcomes such as success, romance, relaxation, adventure. The primary focus of concern today about the advertising of alcoholic beverages has been the rise of underage and alcohol consumption and binge drinking. And although efforts to curb advertising abuses of alcohol continue, consumer advocates may find that they face an uphill battle, and a newly emerging issue is the advertising of marijuana in states where it is legal. No industry has been under greater criticism and regulation than the cigarette industry for its products and marketing and advertising products and practices. Cigarette makers have been under fire from all sides for decades. A second issue of concern concerns the ethics of the tobacco industry's long-standing advertising to young people and to less educated markets. And so in the past several years, electronic cigarettes or e-cigarettes have become the rage of the tobacco companies, and they've been working hard to promote it. And e-cigarette sales have skyrocketed over the last 5 years. It's now a $3.5 billion industry. And so e-cigs vaporize nicotine without burning tobacco. And it's a fast-growing rival to traditional cigarettes. So there are over 45 million users. And the CDC is concerned about how e-cigarettes are attracting more teenagers, and the rate of increase has doubled or tripled in recent years. And some researchers claim that e-cigs are less harmful than regular cigarettes, but this is a continuing debate and not a lot of research done. Advertising and labeling practices that make claims about health and environmental safety have taken on a growing importance over the past decades. And one reason that these issues have come to the forefront is the renewed enforcement activities by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, and state attorneys who are attorney generals who are cracking down on misleading or unsubstantiated claims. And perhaps the best example of a health-related product characteristic that's being advertised very aggressively today is gluten-free. And gluten-free may carry some modest health advantages for the average person, but the population of consumers with celiac disease who have to avoid gluten number about 1% of the population. So experts who have studied this topic have concluded that it's mostly health marketing hype, and some believe that it's just a fad. Ad creep refers to the way that advertising can increasingly be found everywhere you look. Both produce placement and plot placement, we discussed earlier, are special cases of ad creep. They're going into places that once were not considered acceptable for advertisement. School buses, textbooks, ATMs, garbage cans are just sources for these advertisements. And the traditional term for advertising that is located in non-traditional places is called ambient advertising. But ad creep reflects both the way the ads have grown and the way people often feel about its creators. Social media advertising, though, is used in virtually all advertising issues discussed that we've just talked about. Special consideration should be given to it as a controversial category on its own because of its rapid growth in recent years and some of the questionable uses to which it has been employed. As social media advertising grows, so does the opportunity for deceptive advertising via social media rises as well. So now we'll talk a little bit about warranties and guarantees. Warranties were initially used by manufacturers to limit the length of the time that they were expressly responsible for products, but over time they came to be viewed by consumers as mechanisms to protect the buyer against faulty or defective products. And most consumers have had the experience of buying a cell phone, a computer, refrigerator, automobile, or any thousands of other products, only to find that it didn't work properly, or maybe it didn't even work at all. and that is when warranties and guarantees took center stage. So they're promises made to consumers by manufacturers or sellers. A warranty is usually a written contractual promise that attests to the quality or durability of a product purchased for a period of time. And should a product become defective while it's still under warranty for some limited time, say maybe a year, the company agrees to repair or replace the product. A guarantee is also a promise regarding product quality, but guarantees are less likely to be in writing. So you have the law recognizes two types of warranties, and those are implied and express. An implied warranty is an unspoken promise that there's nothing significantly wrong with the product and that the product can be used for purposes intended. An express warranty is explicitly offered at the time of sale, and the nature of express warranties can range from advertising claims to formal certificates, and they can be either oral or written. The passage of the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act in 1975 helped to clarify the nature of warranties for consumers, and it's still the basic law of the land, although the FTC has amended and clarified and interpreted it over the years. And this act was aimed at clearing up a variety of misunderstandings about manufacturers' warranties, especially whether a full warranty was in effect or whether certain parts of the product or certain types of defects were excluded from coverage, resulting in a limited warranty. So the Warranty Act sets standards for what must be contained in a warranty and the ease with which consumers must be able to understand it. If a company, for example, claims that its product has a full warranty, it must contain certain features, including repair within a reasonable time without charge. The law holds that anything less than this unconditional insurance must be promoted as a limited warranty. Another issue of increasing ethical concern is extended warranty. Service plans that lengthen the warranty period and are often offered at an additional cost. And consumer advocates advise against buying these most extended warranties because they often cost as much as the original item, which would eventually cost to replace it. Consumers spend billions of dollars on extended warranties every year. Abuses in the packaging and labeling areas were fairly frequent until the passage of the Federal Packaging and Labeling Act, the FPLA, in 1967. And the purpose of this act was to prohibit deceptive labeling of certain consumer products and to require disclosure of certain important information. And this act, which is administered by the Federal Trade Commission, requires the FTC to issue regulations regarding net content disclosures, identity of commodity, name and place of the manufacturer, packer, distributor. And both the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, have direct responsibilities under the Act, and it authorizes additional regulations when necessary to prevent consumer deception or to facilitate value comparison with respect to declaration of ingredients, slack filling of packages, downsizing of packaging, the use of sense-off designations. And the packaging and labeling issue is drawing renewed interest because of health and environmental claims, and advertising law in specific product categories such as pharmaceuticals, food, tobacco, alcohol, and advertising that is directed at children. And the most important issue in labeling today is really is ingredient labeling. It is difficult to catalog all the consumer issues in which product information is a key factor. Advertising, warranties, guarantees, packaging, labeling constitute the bulk of the concerns. Some other major laws that address information disclosure issues include the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and this prohibits discrimination in the extension of consumer credit. The Truth in Lending Act, which requires all suppliers of consumer credit to fully disclose all credit terms and to permit a 3-day right of rescission in any transaction involving a security interest in the consumer's residence, for example, in the case of home equity loans. Fair Credit Reporting Act ensures that consumer reporting agencies provide information in a manner that is fair and equitable to the consumer. And last, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which regulates the practices of third-party debt collection agencies. We talked about 3 main areas of product information: advertising, warranties and guarantees, and packaging and labeling. Both the FTC and the FDA are actively involved in these issues, and it's important now to look more closely at the federal government's major instrument, the FTC, which ensures that businesses live up to its responsibilities in these areas. And the FTC was created in 1914, and its purpose was to prevent unfair methods of competition in commerce as part of the battle to bust the trust. And over the years, Congress has passed additional laws giving the agency greater authority in the policing of anti-competitive prices. And back in 1938, Congress passed a broad prohibition against unfair and deceptive acts or practices. And since then, the FTC has also been directed to administer a wide variety of other consumer protection laws, including Truth in Lending, Fair Packaging, Fair Credit, and also the Equal Opportunity Act. So in addition to carrying out its ongoing responsibilities, the FTC has had a number of successes in carrying out its mission in the 2000s. And an early accomplishment was the creation of the National Do Not Call Registry. The registry opened to consumers in 2003 and forbid telemarketers from calling consumers who sign up with the registry. The FTC also instituted a requirement that all companies placing marketing calls have their information available for consumers' caller ID systems, and consumers could then report companies that make calls in violation, and we all get these kind of calls. Currently, the FTC is playing a more active role as government's consumer data watchdog. Though the FTC supervises most consumer regulations with respect to product and service information and advertising, and other laws have been passed that address specific issues, it's useful to discuss briefly the most recent federal consumer legislation that has been passed in the last few years. The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010, the Dodd-Frank Act, established the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and Congress established the CFPB to protect consumers by implementing and enforcing consumer financial laws, and some of the activities are listed here in the PowerPoint. In fact, the CFPB was given authority to administer the Credit Card Act of 2009, and it spelled out new regulations governing credit cards. And it was passed by Congress and enacted back in 2010. And the law had 2 purposes, and it was fairness and transparency. And with respect to fairness, this act would prohibit certain practices that are unfair and abusive, such as hiking up the rate on an existing balance, or allowing a customer to go over the limit and then imposing an over-limit fee. And with respect to transparency, CARD would make the rate and fees on credit cards more transparent so that consumers can better understand how much they are paying for their credit card and can actually compare credit cards. The most prominent instance of self-regulation by business in the advertising industry is a program sponsored by the National Advertising Division of the Council of Better Business Bureaus. And this advertising review board were created to help sustain high standards of truth and accuracy in national advertising, and still serves today in an active manner. The NAD initiates investigations, determines issues, collects, evaluates data, and makes decisions as to whether advertisers' claims can be substantiated. So we'll conclude the chapter by providing insights into how the three types of moral manager models would view consumer stakeholders. The moral management model best represents the highest ethical standards of consumer treatment and is the recommended model for businesses to follow. So the model of management morality orientation to consumer stakeholders in moral management. Customers are viewed as opportunities to be exploited for personal or organizational gain. Ethical standards and dealings don't prevail, and active intent is to cheat, deceive, and mislead. In all the marketing decisions, advertising, pricing, packaging, warranting, the customer is taken advantage of to the fullest extent. The amoral management doesn't think through the ethical consequences of its decisions and actions. It simply makes decisions with profitability within the letter of the law as a guide. And management is not focused on what is fair from the perspective of the customer. The focus is on management's rights. No consideration is really given to the ethical implications of interaction with customers. Moral management, on the other hand, customers are viewed as equal partners in transactions. The customer brings needs and expectations to the exchange transaction and is treated fairly. Managerial focus is on the giving of the customer fair value, full information, fair guarantee, and satisfaction. And consumer rights are liberally interpreted and honored. And that concludes Chapter 13.